Hi, I'm Shen and welcome back to my channel at Mama Banana, where I share hacks and tips around home and family life. Today I have a sewing tutorial for you. I'm going to share with you my top beginners sewing tips. I'm going to show you how to sew so that your pattern will follow the template exactly, particularly for little projects like this cloth sanitary pad that requires turning. I have sewn a lot of these and I've managed to get them all to be identical to the template by sewing on the line. So I'm going to share the tips and tricks with you right now. So let's get straight into today's tutorial. In my previous video, I shared with you how I attached a gusset to my Jujube BRB bag, and within that video I've had some requests to share how I made a gusset. This is the gusset that I made. So in today's video on the top tips on how to make a turning sewing project for beginners, I'm going to kill two birds with one stone. So I'm going to show you how to make a miniature version of this. If you want the actual dimensions and all of the full gusset, I will include that in the video description box down below. So as with any sewing project, it all starts with the pattern. If you're drawing out your own, I have a tip for you, and this is tip number 1. If there is a straight line on the outer edge of your pattern, then line that up with the edge of your piece of paper. So that just gives you that bit less cutting. An angled ruler is a great tool to have. So I've just marked the center of my line when I drew it, and now I'm going to line this up with the edge of the paper and draw a line all the way up. Tip number 2 is when cutting out your pattern, I use a ruler to tear off any of the straight lines. It just makes it quicker to cut out your pattern. So I have a nice sharp metal ruler here. I just line the edge of it up with the edge of the straight lines, and I grab a piece of paper, nice firm grip, and I start tearing. Now make sure to have even pressure down on the ruler. Number 3, when drawing out your pattern, right, I like to mark out where I'm going to turn it so that I will remember to mark it on the fabric. The best place to turn your project would be somewhere along a straight line so that you can fold the fabric in, iron it down, and then follow that line, stitch along. So I am going to mark it here. I want to leave that bit open, for that bit in between here open for turning. So here are the 2 pieces of fabric that I will be using for this project. Everything for today's video, I've chosen the colors of pens, fabric, thread, etc., so that it will be the most visible and clear to you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the lightest piece of fabric and draw on the wrong side. Okay, so I'm going to place my template on top. I'm going to get my fabric marker, and I'm going to trace the outline of my template directly onto the fabric. And that's where I'm going to sew. So when you're placing your template onto the fabric, you want to make sure you have enough seam allowance around. Okay, so ideally leave at least ½ inch of fabric around. So you want to make sure you have drawn the outline of the pattern onto the wrong side of the fabric, okay? So now we're going to line our 2 pieces of fabric right sides together, okay? Now to start with, you want to make sure your fabric is nicely ironed flat. That is key to success with many of our sewing projects in general. So I'm just going to trim off the excess fabric to make it easier to work with. Now I am going to clip the fabric together. So something I forgot to do when I drew out the template was I actually forgot to draw on the marks for the turning point. So I just added that on there. I draw directly onto the fabric so that I don't forget not to sew over this area. I'm just going to bring this straight over to the sewing machine, sew it together and come right back. So I'm just back from my sewing machine and I'm going to share some more tips with you here. Okay, so I started on the point where I marked here for turning, and you can see here I've back stitched around 5-6 times. I highly recommend that for any project where there is turning required. At the start and end of your stitch mark, make sure you back stitch around 3, 5, 6 times, okay? So that will just strengthen the area, especially if your fabric or whatever you're turning is quite large or stiff. It just makes it a bit easier. Any of the corners, okay, you would back stitch there as well, because you will be poking that out. So back stitching in these corners will reduce the chances of your stick poking through. And also, if you reduce your stitch length, it just makes it so much easier to increase the accuracy of your stitching, especially if you are a beginner. Now we're ready to cut out the excess fabric. So what I'm going to start with, I'm going to cut a straight line up to the turning points either side here. And when you're going to cut close to a stitch, all right, what I always do is I place the tip of the scissor down onto the fabric and then I cut. That way it makes sure the tip ends exactly where I want it to. And this is particularly useful when you're clipping out the corners. So all these corners, you want to cut the fabric as close to the stitch as possible without actually cutting the stitch. Okay. That's probably one of the best tips I can give you, is when you get, if anywhere that you need cut close to the stitch, push the fabric up to the scissor so you know exactly where it is going to cut down. Obviously make sure you move your finger out of the way when you are cutting. Something I forgot to mention earlier is if you're going to be stitching on the line like I did here for this project, then it is very handy to get a clear foot. I got this in a set off Amazon. I'll include the links in the description box down below. But anyway, so if you have pinking shears, now is the time to use it. So I will be cutting a straight line here, okay, in the turning fabric and leaving enough for seam allowance. Okay. And then I'm just going to cut off the excess fabric all around. Anywhere that's close to a turning point, I kind of cut at an angle to try to get rid of as much fabric as possible, so that when this fabric is turned inside out, there will be less fabric getting stuck in here, so that you have a nice crisp corner. If your project is something kind of long or bulky or complicated, you will go from the furthest end, turn that point inside out and push from the far point over to the opening. And another tip is, for any of these corners, if you think you'll have any difficulty in turning it when it's on the right side, I would start poking it inside out from this side first. And that helps to have a really clean point. So now I'm going to turn in the seam allowance here at my turning point, fold it in, and then iron everything down before top stitching the turning point closed and all the way all around. So I've just ironed this flat, and once you've ironed it, you get rid of that poofiness, so it instantly looks a bit more professional. And when you get to iron it down before sewing the opening closed, then it means you can line it and manipulate the fabric whatever way so that the fold will fall perfectly. So I'm going to go over to the sewing machine now and top stitch this closed and complete that all the way around so that looks nice and neat, and then I'll be right back. Since this is a gusset, what I'm going to do is I need to sew a seam in the middle here. So this is the outer part of fabric and this is the lining, so I'm going to fold it this way so that the lining is facing out, and then I am going to stitch a seam all down here at the edge. And because this is quite bulky, rather than starting off at the edge over here, I'm going to start in the center, go down to the end, back stitch, and then cut the thread, and then start the needle over here, and then sew to the end and back stitch. Sometimes, a lot of times I find that it's easier if you start away from the edge, especially as a beginner, and you can either reverse stitch up to the beginning again or turn the fabric and sew in the other direction. And this is the finished product. I got this line to be perfectly straight by using this overcast foot over here. Oops. Okay, and it's so handy. And that is the finished product. Okay. If you've any questions at all, please do ask me down in the comments section down below. And if you have any hacks, tips, suggestions yourself on turning, sewing for beginners, please do share with the rest of us down in the comments section down below. If you found today's tutorial helpful, let me know by giving it a thumbs up, and I will make more content like this. I upload a new video every week on hacks and tips, all centered around home, family and kids, as well as product reviews that make our lives that bit easier. So until the next video, stay safe, wash your hands, thank you and goodbye.